This episode of our This Week in XR podcast is sponsored by Zapper. Zapper is one of the world's leading XR companies. Over the past 12 years, they've won numerous awards for memorable campaigns. They've democratized AR by making tools and SDKs that anyone can use. And they created ZapBox, the world's most affordable mixed reality headset. Most recently, Zapper worked with Unilever to create an enhanced QR code called Accessible QR, which enables packaged goods to speak to the blind and partially sighted. If you're thinking XR, give the team at Zapper a call or visit zapper.com to see how they can help you on your XR journey. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, September 1st. I'm Charlie Fink. I'm here with Roni Abovitz and Ted Schilowitz for This Week in XR. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. Lots to talk about. An interesting late summer week.
We got a great guest. We have a great guest, Michael Mack, Roni's friend from Europa Park. It is a tremendous theme park in Germany that is, I haven't seen it. Roni has been there. So perhaps you can talk it up for us. But it looks fantastic, very high tech, very clean.
Yeah, Michael is amazing. He grew up in the park. You could almost say he's a citizen of a theme park. One of the first people I ever met who grew up as a kid because it was from his father and grandfather. And there's a castle that somehow links back to the family that goes back hundreds of years. So it's not like like Disney's fake castle. It's like a real thing. And there was some mythology that like Walt post-war was wandering around Europe, and this was one of the places he saw because it started from like these themed dinners around the castle and turned into entertainment and eventually became a formal theme park.
Well, this company,
it was incredible being there. It was just like wild, and it was like being in a very authentic Disney with some incredibly rich and detailed rides and themes and things I had never seen anywhere else in the world. So it was very, very exciting.
Great. We'll get to that in a minute. It's the end of the summer, so we had some interesting news this week, but probably nothing that is going to change the course of humanity. I did want to mention OpenAI announced after a $540 million loss in 2022 that this year their run rate is for revenue is going to close in on $1 billion. So that is pretty good. 28 million to 1 billion in 1 year.
Yeah, so it's and I think that may be changing the course of humanity, Charlie. Because,
yeah, well, it's true because they needless to say, they launched their enterprise product. I did not know it was not already an enterprise product, but apparently they've got a special layer, and it includes premium access and all sorts of other goodies. And they're selling $1 billion worth of it, so it must be pretty good.
It only took like 20-something billion of investment to generate that first billion in revenue.
That is true.
I think that's
not unlike other tech companies that are ruling the world right now.
No, but think about it. Like the amount of activation energy to generate that first billion was like in the order of magnitude of 20 billion plus God knows how much extra support from Microsoft. So it's not easy.
Does that seem like almost the standard formula now to move the needle? Because you touched this on the hardware standpoint. We've talked about this a number of times with mixed reality. It feels like, as scary as a number that sounds, 20 plus billion to create and energize something that is going to be sort of meaningful and potentially over a long return rate, investment. And
look at what it costs to get Tesla off the ground. It's like 20 to 30 billion.
Yeah.
If you look at all the rounds of funding, and now it's creating lots of revenue and big market cap, but like it wasn't $500 million or one or two. And if you cut it off at any point, that would have just nothing would have happened, right?
Died,
it's like
right.
10. I think you're right, Ted. I mean, some of these big new activations, you want to really create a market. You're talking 10, 20 or more billion to make something happen.
There's an Israeli company, AI21 Labs, that just raised $283 million to compete with OpenAI. So they are enterprise focused as well. Obviously, people are fishing where the fish are, so to speak. In other news, VRChat and Horizon, the two social VR sites, are both launching mobile devices and are openly testing them. This is long overdue, in my opinion. I think VRChat, seeing what Rec Room did on game consoles, should have jumped right on that. And I think they are. And Horizon, of course, this is an interesting concession from Meta that headsets alone are not going to make a social place or social network online work, that you have to have mobile. That is what people are using all the time. If you want them to engage with your content consistently and long term, it has to be mobile.
Yeah.
Well, Charlie, this is virtual world trying to access the biggest audience, right? Not limiting virtual one-to-one to headset count.
Yep.
It says headset plus mobile plus PC plus game console. That's billions of people. We don't care what device you're in. Come to our virtual world. That makes better economics, right?
I think so too. And again, it's still unclear who really cares about Horizon. They need to increase their reach. It's not going to get there based on their traffic to the Quest community.
Well, and to your point, Charlie, for the minority of people that are watching the visual version of this on YouTube versus listening to the podcast, which is most, you have your VR chat T-shirt on today.
I do.
We have both been organic believers and supporters in VR chat platform as something that grew almost to the antithesis of what we were talking about, Roni, on large companies going after a large shot, grew as kind of an organic sort of build out and creation of community, and continue to raise small bits of funding along the way, and still continue to drive the right sort of organic use case and growth case for that medium, as opposed to buying their way into it. And I think they're an interesting company to keep an eye on.
So one more story before we get to Michael. Roni, this one is for you. Everybody who owns a Magic Leap 1 got an email on Monday that said they would be discontinuing support after 2024. So that gives us a good long time. Who needs support? Is it going to matter to anybody who is actually using a Magic Leap 1? Because I think most of them are either aficionados of Dr. Groardboard. I wanted to ask you about Dr. Groardboard and if you think that's going to go to the Apple device as well, since Magic Leap has essentially nothing to do with it. But what does it mean at the end of life? It doesn't sound like its life is going to end. Exactly.
So Charlie, let me unpack the parts I do
Please.
know. This is nothing official from the company, just like from what I read. And number one, the Magic Leap Creator Edition was a system for developers and early enthusiasts. Launched 2018. Every single tech company basically end of life support on hardware and software. Google does it, Apple, Microsoft, etc. And they do it without all the fanfare and noise we're actually seeing around Magic Leap. So they're like, somehow you get this weird thing. Some of the misinformation is that people are like, oh, they're shutting down the whole thing. They're not. It's the first generation product that in end of 2024 will no longer get support. Now here's the question the real enthusiasts are asking, and I'm in support of them. One of the things that's not clear is they're saying they're going to shut down the servers, which will brick the devices. I think there's one thing about you don't have to actively support, but it costs very little to have some AWS server with the files needed to keep what was built running and the things that were made downloadable. Right. So I think the community that's enthusiastic, and there's always communities that love to keep like old PCs, Ataris, God knows what going on. They're like, why are you bricking this? Don't spend any money supporting, but it's like $100 a month to keep like an AWS server running. Why don't you keep that alive? I think that's probably the most meaningful debate. Not that a company after like what 6-7 years of a Gen 1 device, they don't need to actively support it, write new OS, no more software updates, but don't brick it. So I think people are angry about the possibility of like it just stops working. I don't think they care if the company supports them anymore, but don't make it not work. Right. So I mean, people have old computers, like your old iPod still can kind of work. You can make it work in the firmware, and there's hackers. So I think that community is very agitated on what they perceive as a bricking thing, not a expected end of support, but please don't brick it. That's the confusing piece of this message.
Well,
can't they just put it up on Git?
Yeah. There's so many things they could do. And I think there's some confusion. And Charlie, you may want to reach out to Peggy and just like ask for the official thing. Like, are you bricking or simply not supporting with new software builds anymore? Because if it is a bricking thing, then the community will actually be very agitated.
Here's the confusion around the bricking versus non-bricking is in many users' experience with the Magic Leap, including mine, and I've been, obviously an enthusiast. I was a huge, huge fan of Dr. G. I tell people that it is the most important mixed reality game you need to play to understand where things are going, and I've been very overt about that. The worry that I have, and I think a lot of people have, is the Magic Leap device, for most of its life, Magic Leap 1 we're talking about, had an insistence to call home, had a need to put in, a passcode, and it would kick up to a server to activate it and allow you to use that device. And very often, to my frustration and other frustration, taking it around and showing it to people where I couldn't get easy access to the internet, I would often have to link my phone to the Magic Leap in a sort of a personal hotspot mode, which was fine. It was just a little bit of a pain in the ass, but I could do it. My concern is that they haven't had a lot of clarity, at least in what I've read, and maybe there's more information on that part of the equation. So I'm hoping that if they do choose to end of life the device, which you made all the points about old Atari systems and all that's correct. If you still have an old Atari 2600, you don't have to connect it to the internet to play a game on it.
Right.
The concern is that that whole system was built around that connected to the internet use case. For security reasons and other reasons, they wanted to keep track of the data and stuff. If they stop that, the device is effectively bricked for many reasons. Because if I just put it on and turn it on and say I want to show my friends Dr. G because it's this historic, really important game, and it goes through this thing and says, "Oh, go ahead and put in your passcode," and sorry, can't connect, and that's the end of it. That's a real problem. So I don't know, Roni, if you have any thoughts about that, or people need to make a much more overt, bricking means different things to different people. And if it has to call home, it is effectively bricked, even if it's not bricked.
Look, Charlie, this is our opinion as people who are not involved in the day-to-day or anything of the company, but as the founder of the company, and I know all the blood, sweat, tears, and love that went into building it. I know there's like a lot of enthusiasts who don't want to see things like Dr. G, Create, Tonandi, which may never be built again. They were so far ahead of their time.
Yeah.
That a lot of the folks wanted to exist. So that someone 10 years from now goes, look what I made, and it's a copy. And they're like, well, the Dr. G thing was a myth because nothing runs it anymore. Right. I think people want it for a variety of reasons. And the fact that you have this plethora of devices, that the Gen 1, which will be accessible maybe now to kids or schools, it's not that hard to stop that call home piece and put the things on GitHub and just let the community have fun with it. That's all.
That was the whole point in the first place.
By the way, the goodwill of being so gracious like that, just letting the community, listening to developers, listening to community who love it. It's so easy to do. I don't understand why they wouldn't do that.
But this was really out of the blue. I'm not quite sure I understand it either. So we should get some comment from them if we can, some further clarification. So let's bring Michael in. He's just coming in from the waiting room.
There he is.
Good. So we have a very interesting discussion. Roni has introduced me to Michael. We've had a couple of really interesting discussions. Michael is certainly aware that Paramount is building theme parks now, and the legacy of what he's done.
Oh, here we go.
By the way, it's an interesting bit of color as Michael signs back in the world of theme park lore and interesting stories. If none of our listeners have ever read the backstory of Knott's Berry Farm and how Knott's Berry Farm came to life, it is a really, really interesting story about truly a berry farm, and the wife of Mr. Knott opening a fried chicken stand to support all of the people that were coming to get the berries. And then a queue would happen because the fried chicken was so good. And they eventually added little carnival rides because all the kids were bored waiting in line for the fried chicken. And before they knew it, they had a little micro theme park in front of the berry stand, and that's how Knott's Berry Farm got started. So it's a really interesting story of the life of need of line management for picking the berries became the reality.
All right, here's Michael. Michael Mack, welcome to the show. Thanks for dropping in this afternoon from the continent. Roni has been talking about his visit to Europa Park since he came back.
Thank you very much for having me.
I was reading your bio, which is fascinating, and Roni, we were just talking about it a minute ago. This is your family business, right? You grew up in the theme park you now own and operate.
Well, it seems and it feels like being a theme park native, so to speak. So I'm most likely the only true Truman Show around the world.
Um, the Roni was talking about the origin story. Maybe we can start there because it sounds like a really fascinating journey from being sort of a local attraction to turning into one of the second biggest theme park in Europe.
Plus the real castle. You have to talk about that, Michael.
Yeah, I just was listening to the podcast. So, I mean, the family's indeed into the business starting 1780, but actually not at the
1780?
1780, right? So we're 240 something years old. And myself, I'm the eldest at the 8th generation. And my dad, who actually founded Europa Park, is the eldest in the 7th generation. And we did start actually doing wood carpeting. So we come out from building carriages, wagons, and everything you can make literally out of wood. And in a city called Waldkirch in the Black Forest, we were known as the Mercedes back in the days of building all what can move clocks or like organs. And then later we entered the circus business to doing the wagons for the circus people. We did for the kings and the queens in Europe. We did the carousel or the carriages. So 1921, actually, we had the first wooden coaster being built, and it was in Tivoli in Copenhagen. So as you know, all the theme park business inherited back in Copenhagen with a park called the Dyreshaus Bakken, which was back in 1790 or 80. And so we delivered there, like in the 20th century, the first wooden coaster. And yes, indeed, there are rumors going around that Walt Disney was visiting Europe before he was thinking of making his own theme park. And the story I know of is that my grandfather got a call from Walt back after World War II if he would build a attraction for him, which we unfortunately, which he turned down because he was fighting in the war, and he didn't have good memories of that time. So that's where it all started.
Um, Now, there's a real castle in the middle of Europa Park, not a fake one like there is in Disney World.
Now, there's a real castle. It's dated back on the year 1492. It was built. It was an old water castle called the Balthasar, and it was a noble family who lived in that region. And it was partly French, partly German, so it moved back and forth. And actually, yes, we did. Well, the original story was that we were a supplier for parks around the world, and Disney did travel at some point. I don't know. We didn't have Instagram back in those days, so I can't show you a picture to prove that he really was. But he was truly inspired by the Mack family. At least he wanted to buy coasters out of the factory at McRide's. And if he now was at the castle or not, I guess that's the best kept secret, at least at our place.
Can you go inside and walk around?
Yeah, it's still operating. So we have a restaurant in the castle. It's one of the fine dining restaurants at Europa Park, and it's still a part belonging to the main park.
How
Michael,
many restaurants are there?
Well, we have several restaurants. We have 4 fine dining restaurants where we have real cooks preparing your meal. All the other one are like quick serving restaurants. So in total, we have about 60 outlets, but 4 of them are like in the same league, I would say, than the castle. And we are very proud to be the one of the very few, I guess, the only one having a 2-star Michelin restaurant at one of our hotels.
Amazing.
Charlie and Ted, one of the things I found very fascinating was like the depth of quality and detail everywhere, which I think rivals anything I've ever seen at Disney. Across some of the best things Disney did. But Michael, the parts I wanted you to talk about in this show were, first of all, the really incredible VR experience where you get into the helicopter and you run around the space, which I think is one of the examples of like very well executed location based immersive VR. And then the thing I loved the most, which was your kind of this immersive food visual audio experience, which I just blew my mind. It blew the mind of Richard Taylor. who you guys know co-founded Weta, has won many Academy Awards for like The Lord of the Rings and Avatar. It takes a lot to blow his mind and mine, but Michael did, and it was insane. So maybe we could talk about the immersive VR one, but then this like next level thing, which I thought it was just one of the coolest, highest end things in immersive entertainment anywhere. So, Michael.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, we are not so used to get applause by internationally professionals like you are. So it's really truly an honor to be in this podcast today. And I know that Ted, we had contacted a year ago or so,
Yep.
talking to Richard and Charlie as well, listening to your podcast. So it's quite something for me being a young kid in the industry, not the family, but let me put it that way. I mean, every generation tried to change the business. And as you can imagine, nobody was clapping widely their hands when I came around with XR and VR because my dad literally was afraid when in 2015 implemented the first VR attraction at Europa Park, which was on a roller coaster. We named it Coastiality, so you would have a VR headset on your roller coaster, and all the nerds went bananas, and they said, "Michael is ruining the heart of roller coaster business, and nobody will ever go into a theme park again because they all do digital." So I think it was that kind of distraction back in the days what brought us to the development where we stand right now. And I just funnily have listened to a podcast, well, actually to a YouTube video of Steve Jobs, and he said when he was talking to Stanford, connecting the dots. Back in the days, I had no clue which dots I was making up by bringing VR into our park. Now being in this podcast, it somehow shows me that the journey was worth doing. And the product actually, which came out, was a experience called Yulby, and that's a free roaming experience. So we went off the roller coaster with our headsets, trying to be immersed in a free roaming experience, and we put it under the inspiration of the Void, quite honest to say, which was back in the days invented by Brett Steiner of his park at Utah. And I heard that there's somebody out there trying to have VR free roaming experience. And so without seeing the attraction, we rebuilt it. And that was Roni was telling about. We have acquired an IP called Amber Plague, which is quite well known in France by the Lagardère family. And we're trying to put into not only the tracking system by 80 cameras that you can track your hands and your feet, but we also put in like really haptic elements. And there's one where we have a floor which is moving and shaking to um, to stimulate a flight with a helicopter. We had put like guns in there which you haptically can touch, and so it's in a half an hour fully immersed tracking VR attraction, similar to the Void, but just making it, I would say, partly better because we have more haptic movements, which have been built by the Mark Wright's factory. So there's roller coaster technique in it. And out of that, we tried to invent a new restaurant of the future, which is called Adrenaline, which is based right next to the Yulby Pro, and that's what Roni and Richard were doing. And it's a new immersive way of dining. We have a lot of people around the world come and visit it. So you literally go from room to room, and it's a driving unit. So literally your table drives with you from a room to another. And it's quite difficult to explain, but here I invite you to come over to have a look at it, but it's never done before. The immersion with video, driving, and Michelin star cuisine.
Free roam VR has, especially in 30-minute sessions, a notoriously bad throughput. So putting it in the park, of course, solves the utilization problem that standalone venues have, but it doesn't solve the throughput of taking equipment on and off, cleaning it, attendants explaining how to use it, and then of course there's the core experience. So I'm just wondering how many people you could put through there in an hour, and whether that impacts the profitability, or maybe profitability isn't the point of that particular experience.
Well, you did a great point, Charlie, on that one, and that's exactly what we seeing as well. So when you look at the 30-minute experience, which we call the ULB Pro, there is indeed a problem, I would say, as a throughput problem, because we did a lot of research. First, we had a backpack on the experience. Now we changed them to the HTC headsets, and yes, it is a problem, but I think the good about the Mark family, and I think Roni was mentioning it, because we are so successful, being voted 8 times in a row by Amusement Today the best theme park in the world. So we're doing a pretty good and steady let's say, like the core business is running extremely well, and I think that it is a paid research for us, because I do believe that in the future, VR or even XR, it's about platform technology. I do believe that there's a huge impact being seen in a couple of years in location-based entertainment. If you see the ULB Pro as a standalone business model, I think you wouldn't be beneficial. But due to the fact that we can take the learnings from that ULB Pro into something which is the Adrenaline, or something which is the ULB Go. And the ULB Go one indeed is very profitable. We do about 80 to 100 an hour. So that's quite reasonable.
Yeah, that is impressive.
So the technique is like very, very low maintenance on that one, because you don't have the tracking from the outside. So you don't need the 80 cameras, which we put in there. So it's I would say, like, the big one was research to see what can you do in the attraction of a theme park for tomorrow. And again, it's not a huge loss, but it's not the same profitability than you would have with a theme park being visited by 6 million visitors a year. So you could completely correct. The Pro gives you a hard time, and I would tell that to all the customers want to buy one. I mean, we did sell one to Hamburg Miniature Wonderland, the second largest attraction in Germany. It's based in Hamburg. So they're very happy with it, with a great throughput, but it's more or less an addition to the existing park experience.
Is it an addition? Is there a charge, an upcharge, an additional ticket for it, so people make an appointment while they're there? Is that how it works? Yeah.
I do see the Pro like our 2-star Michelin restaurant, which has 40 seats, and but you get a different experience which you wouldn't get somewhere else. And let's say the park can afford it to have, but most clearly the better business model is having VR on a roller coaster called Coastiality, and having the ULB Go as a short version of 10 minutes.
And Charlie, one of the things I was very impressed with, Michael, was like near Yulby was Adrenaline. And I know there's a lot of things that I can't talk about because Michael wants people to experience it, so I won't talk about those things. But what I thought was amazing, it was like a remix of immersive experience. Sound, visual, amazing things that transport you. So you're just like at ease, very science fiction. Like there was the whole theater of moving from place to place that was incredible. It felt like some kind of Kubrick movie, Spielberg thing that you were in. So I thought, like, in terms of a true experience, and by the way, there's food and smell. Like that was all world class, was some of the best chefs on the planet. And if you think about like big headset VR, that's not going to work, right? With very lightweight, maybe Magic Leap type AR or where that goes, you can imagine this being better because you're not going to feel nauseous. You're not going to lose the sense. But what I thought was great was you were with a community of people moving through a journey that was sight, sound, smell, that was just incredible. It's like one of the best full sensory immersive experiences I think you can get anywhere. And what I thought Michael was doing really well, he also showed us the back of show, like the whole operation, the computation, making everything work, and how all the magic was happening. It was incredibly impressive. And I thought this is how the future of immersive LBX will be done. One, people that really know what they're doing. Two, they have a core operation like the theme park that is a sustainable, profitable business, so they can afford to do these R&D iterations and get it right and do things like do things like adrenaline until they start to really work and pop. But the adrenaline was so positive, like everyone just hangs out afterwards, and there's like a place to hang out afterwards, and the whole experience felt like what we all want immersive to be one day. And I was basically encouraging Mike, you have to bring this to America. Bring it to LA, bring it to Chicago. I just think it will pop. I don't think anyone's had anything like that. The closest we ever did it magically, we did one event with Sigur Rós. I told this to Michael, where we did Tonandi in a space with candles and food and music and all of it. And that was like the closest thing ever we had experience to what Michael showed. But what Michael took was next level and put it all together with all these other inventive things that I won't talk about. People just need to experience. But in terms of like what immersive storytelling can be, and Ted and I talk about this a lot, I felt it was also a great immersive storytelling experience. He went on a journey that was both passive and active, which is a very strange thing to say, right? Like movies are passive and you want that low stress lean back. This had that feeling of I don't need to stress myself like the other one where you're fighting and shooting stuff, but there was the activity and engagement that I'd never experienced before in anything like that. It was just this really nice, artful blend. I thought it was one of the most original things going on in the world today in immersive LBX. So anyway, Michael, I don't know if that was a question, but it was just sort of heaping praise on your creativity and hoping that you continue to do stuff like that.
Michael, is this, do you have a skunk works like research group like Disney Imagineering, or is it all sort of on you and an intimate team?
Another great question. Let me put it that way, Charlie, to try to explain. I think that's something what Europe is special in. I mean, when you look at the theme park world in Europe, particularly, you don't have huge brands for whatever reason entering the European market successfully. So most of the parks are coming out of a fair ground, long time history. So we have a total different approach, I think, to giving the people a good time. And my grandfather, when he was still alive, he always told me, you just spend money if you have a customer. So he wouldn't start developing without a customer. And so answering your question precisely is no, we don't have a research department like Disney does. And I'm fighting and every day, literally, to get a little bit of a development budget. But I think what I've proven the older generation or the seventh generation, so to say, is by putting in those technology with like UV Pro, even though it's not the most beneficial attraction in the park, that there is something for next generation to grasp on and actually to learn from. And we are thinking in generations rather than in stock exchange quarters. So I think it has a lot to do with the DNA being European, and we're trying to give the people the best time ever when they come over to Europa Park. Indeed, we are a company which is also having employees to pay, and we're a company who have to make revenue, of course. But having said so, and I give you an example, when I was walking with my dad through our first hotel, one of the biggest hotels at the park, Colosseo, and when I was a kid out of 16 years, and he told me, look to the two rooms, and we went back and forth to a room and the other room, and I couldn't feel the difference. And I was asking my dad, why are we doing this for half an hour? And he told me, look at the picture which is behind the bed. So there was one time there was a painter out of Italy, and he would paint the picture. And then the other one was like somebody just gluing on the picture because it was prefabbed by any Chinese company. And he said, like, do you see the difference of the two pictures? And for me, being a 16-year-old, thinking about a weekend and going to concert, he said, like, no, Dad, I just see that the one is double the price of the other. And he said, like, well, you don't see it, but you can feel it, because no picture is the same, because it was drawn by a human being and an Italian artist. So this lesson learned me a lot. that people will appreciate the quality. And I think what they have when they go out of a UB Pro experience, they surely experience something they never been seeing before. And they go back and say that this is our park, which we love and which we will come back the years to come and over generations. And we have 75% of repeating visitors who coming back, who are true loyal fans of the park. And of course, we want to surprise them by things like things. So yes, it is a development, but it's not something out of the blue where you have like 100 people researching for the future. We'd rather put in a ULB Pro, make the people happy, and say that this was a part of our development team, actually.
Michael's being modest, though. I'm going to say this, Michael. One of the things I always read about, and when I visited Disney World and Disneyland, we were partnered with Disney, going to like the place where Walt had an apartment and he would like sometimes sleep in there. But meeting you and your dad, who like you were a citizen of the park and you're there all the time meeting and greeting people. It was like, wait a minute, this is like being with Walt Disney or Walt Disney's kid who lives at the park, knows it so well, and is constantly talking to everyone on the rides. And Michael has this group, we got to meet them, this sort of creative brain trust group. Ted, it would be Ted and Charlie, kind of like a Pixar-y brain trust group, which I got to meet them. Really brilliant people. He doesn't need 100 Imagineers because they're so deep and so connected and so living the life that folks who are like detached from a park, who aren't living it, like Walt used to live there and constantly plus up. And I'm saying, it clicked when my head when I was walking around with Michael. I was like, "You are that." It was very, very amazing. I'm a huge like Disney fan. And go now. Now I became a Michael Mack fan. To see that love of what was going on, and then he took me to all these secret grottos and hideouts and places like from here's where this famous person came in and there's like a giant tiger on the wall, and I won't talk about that place, Michael, or this like thing at the top where we had the dinner, and that was like all these things where we are so enthusiastic. By the way, I think the lesson for me as a founder, any other founder, you have to be so into your company, into your customers, love your customers. You can't do what he does and his family does if you don't love the customers and audience. And one thing that was very evident, we were brought in to watch an ice show, and I'm like, ice show? I don't really want to see an ice show. And then suddenly there's like, we got some great sodas and popcorn, and we're in these great seats. And all of a sudden a big dog robot shows up and is ice skating with this incredible visual effects thing. I was like, holy crap. And it was like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And it was all choreographed so well. And the robot was really funny. This kind of scary big dog robot, from Boston Dynamics, that is sort of like terrifying. And it's just this cute, fun. It felt like a Disney character coming to life. And I was like, this is genius. And you only know how to do things like that because they were so in tune with the audience. And I just really love that constant feedback loop. I think there's a lot for them to learn from Imagineering, but I have friends at Imagineering, I think, that still have a lot to learn from what Europa Park is doing.
So here's my question for Michael as I'm listening to you guys all sort of talk about all these pieces and parts that make up this world. And I think all of us here have kind of a life history growing up in our own way in and out of theme parks, right? I grew up in Orlando as an Orlando kid. So as you might imagine, I have a legacy of spending a lot of time there and then working there on various sort of stages of my life. So I kind of know the ins and the outs of these things, which is part of why my passion is there. Nowhere near what Michael gets to do every day, which is literally live inside it. But my question for Michael is, where do you get your inspiration from? Do you travel around the world? Do you go to other theme parks? And maybe as a secondary question, what have you seen that excites you outside of Europa Park that you think, wow, that's amazing? Like things that you haven't implemented yet, but others have tried and experimented with that excites you and inspires you.
Well, I think that due to DNA that we are as well a roller coaster producer, you do travel to other parks, and I do have a great respect of the Disney guys because they are amazing what they do and how they multiplicate their parks around the world with a high quality. Um, I think we couldn't do that because, as Roni was mentioning, we do live the park day and night, and we try to be a great host. So where do I get the inspiration? I think surely about the roller coaster manufacturing company who is like building a lot of rides for the industry. So you know a little bit what's coming up next. And on top of that, meeting people like you. I mean, when Roni was over and Richard, we talked. Oh my God, we didn't sleep a lot, and I think we made the best out of 3 days, going to bed at 3, 4 o'clock at night, sleeping a couple of hours, and continue to talk. So I think inspiration does come from industry friends who are out there thinking about the future, thinking about what's next, thinking out of the box, literally. And I think this inspiration can come from everywhere. What I would love to do, and think what is an attraction where we are not good, and is surely about multiplicating the experience you have at Europa Park because it's so dependent on the family. So if you would ask me, I would love to have anybody out there who would help me bringing this idea to different places without getting overexcited. But I think Europa Park somewhere else in the world would be something great, or even an adrenaline somewhere else, or even a Yulby, or we just about to starting our Dramatica horror season. So we're just implementing a new interactive theater called Eden Manor, Balthasar's Secret. It's woven in the story of our long history with the Balthasar Castle. And I was just speaking on my podcast with Daniel Lamar, the vice chairman of Cirque du Soleil. So I would love to have like people out there who just coming with me to the adventure. And as well, we have a lot of ideas with Ronnie. And so I think there's so much out there which I can't tell in particular. I think the chances just come when the time is right. So I think that we are a very good place of being hosted perfectly, at least in Europe. I would assume we're one of the best, but we can't compete with big corporations who do have. Or maybe that would be something I would be actually. Now you're asking me. I would love to speak to some of the big manufacturers of XR glasses, and they would come up and say, Michael, let's do something together. We change the software for you, or we would brainstorm or develop together with you the next immersive theater in the world. So that's really something.
How many places have 6 million people a year coming through looking for amazing entertainment with the guy who runs it being very enthusiastic? I think it's a missed opportunity for people in XR.
So I have two last questions as we need to wrap up our show, Michael. One is, what is your favorite attractions at Europa Park? Not just current, but all time, and why?
That's a question I get asked quite often, and I would say like it depends who I'm with. So and I love all our attraction. If I go with my mother, I would certainly choose the Pirates of the Batavia or the Arthur ride, which we done with Luc Besson. If I'm with my kids, they are more into Silver Star and Blue Fire. If I'm with Roni, it surely is Adrenaline and Yulby. So I think there's for everybody there's something, but event-wise, I'm a huge fan of Dramatica, our horror event, and in the immersive theater we're about to create. But of course, I'm a coaster guy, so I would say if it should be the one, it would be certainly Blue Fire, a great coaster, which I was able to build 14 years ago, and it's the first one in the Mack history who has a looping, so that marks a tipping point in my life.
Yeah, a looping sounds scary because you don't want any guests to fall out when you get up to the top.
Yeah, you won't fall out. I can promise
So,
that.
no, I know, of course, I'm teasing you. One last question.
Yes.
So, you mentioned your kids. I'm excited to hear you say that because there's yet another generation of the Mac family that will continue the tradition that's been going on for 250 years.
Well, I do hope that my kids taking the legacy on. I mean, my eldest one is now 12 years old, and the other one is 9. So I don't want to push them into the business, but I think by growing up already at a theme park, it helps a lot to get the DNA and the heartbeat of the whole family, and just before who did a great job.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. It's fantastic to meet you. I will see you in Europe sometime soon because obviously I have to make Europa Park a destination, not just for the high tech and immersive attractions you're bringing, but also I really love the idea of the hotels. I was just looking at the restaurants before we started the show, thinking I must be hungry this morning because I felt like I could eat the digital content on the screen.
Look, Charlie, I'm vegetarian, and they accommodated that very well. But the food quality, I just thought was next level. You don't expect that at a theme park, and
No.
I don't want to bash Disney because they do a good job, but it was like next level.
Yeah, but there's nothing at Disneyland. Believe me, I worked for Disney for 10 years. I know that park inside and out. There's no food there that's great. The best food there is all right. But if you're eating in the restaurants as just a regular consumer, it is very hard to find anything that isn't a hamburger that was made 3 hours ago.
Michael had great food and great chefs, and I was just astounded. And what it does, the experience that you just have great food almost everywhere. Even the everyday stuff on the side, it was like this was just amazing because there's pride in it. The other last thing I know, Michael, we're going over, but I thought it was kind of cool to see that so many things that they had were real. Like when you go to a Disney, again, I don't want to bash our friends at Disney. The Imagineers will make it. Michael's team will comb Europe and find that painting might be 300 years old. That statue, which that's a real statue that could be 1,000 years old, 100 years old, and they comb the world for it. So there's this weird blend of this is real stuff with really good food and great experiences that just felt very different from some of the synthetic stuff we see in America.
Yeah, as a dovetail between the episodes that dive into this, and Michael, you mentioned our friend Ken Brenschneider from Utah. I think this episode and the episode where we interview Ken are a good 1-2 punch if you want to learn about a style of themed entertainment that is relying on history and historical artifacts and the reality of making those into an environment that's a themed environment that also kind of connects you to sort of modern attractions and modern technology, but through a lens of, as you walk around these places, these aren't fabricated castles. These things are real. They've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. This artwork has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's interesting that Ken tried to duplicate that in Utah and probably learned a lot from you, Michael, I assume.
So I hope that Charlie and Ted, you haven't been with us, and just why don't you bring Ken with you?
Okay.
So you're more than welcome to visit us at Europa Park. It would be more than honored, and thank you again for hosting me. Actually, here in Europe tonight at your time, it's today. Thank you so much.
That's our show this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Have a great long Labor Day weekend, and we'll see you here next Friday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.